The Bleeding Engine of Forgotten Stars. By David Hall. The 1st of March, 2025. Chapter List. The Rust-Kissed Moor of Xylos. Echoes in the bone-dust wastes. The cogsmith's lament and the screaming gears. Descent into the Viridian veins. The calculus of carnage. Shadows forged in molten iron. The obsidian shard of unmaking. Where clockwork angels fall silent. The galvanic feast. The final theorem of terror. Summary: in the grimy, soot-choked realm of a decaying steampunk empire teetering on the brink of collapse, a relentless and horrifying entity begins to stalk the labyrinthine underbelly of the metropolis. As the body count rises with grotesque and mechanically enhanced mutilations, a small band of disparate individuals, a disgraced inventor, a hardened enforcer, and a fugitive mystic, find themselves drawn into a desperate struggle for survival against a foe that defies both logic and the known laws of their intricate, gear-driven world. Their investigation leads them deeper into the city's festering secrets, uncovering a terrifying truth about the Empire's foundations and the monstrous power that now threatens to consume it entirely in a tide of blood and sparking metal. Chapter 1: The Rust-Kissed Moor of Xylos. The air in the lower sectors of Ethelberg hung thick and greasy, a perpetual twilight cast by the towering, rust-eaten machinery that clawed at the smog-choked sky. Gears groaned like dying beasts, and the hiss of escaping steam punctuated the endless drone of the city's mechanical heart. Elias Thorne, a man whose once sharp inventions were now tarnished by years of drink and regret, huddled deeper into the grimy alleyway. The flickering gaslight cast long, skeletal shadows that danced with the swirling dust motes, each one a potential phantom in his increasingly paranoid mind. He clutched the dented flask tighter, the cheap liquor offering a fleeting warmth against the chill that seeped not just from the damp cobblestones but from a deeper, more primal fear. The whispers had started weeks ago, hushed rumors among the cogworkers and scrap dealers of disappearances, of bodies found twisted into impossible shapes, their flesh interwoven with gleaming, alien metal. At first, they were dismissed as the usual grim fare of the Undercity, tales exaggerated by desperation and rot gut. But the frequency had increased, the details growing more intricate. Tonight, the dread was palpable, a tangible weight in the stagnant air. Even the ever-present clatter of the automatons seemed muted, as if the very machines sensed the encroaching horror. Elias had seen things, fleeting glimpses in the periphery, shadows that moved with unnatural speed, the glint of something sharp and metallic where no metal should be. He tried to rationalize it, to blame the fumes or the cheap liquor, but the fear was a cold knot in his gut that refused to be untied. A sudden, wet thud echoed from the end of the alley. Elias froze, his breath catching in his throat. It was not the usual sound of refuse falling or a drunken brawl. This was heavier, softer, sickeningly organic. He strained his ears, the silence that followed amplifying the frantic hammering of his own heart. Curiosity, the same dangerous curiosity that had driven his inventive spirit and ultimately led to his downfall, began to gnaw at his fear. He edged forward, his hand instinctively reaching for the rusty wrench tucked into his belt. The gaslight flickered again, casting grotesque shapes on the damp brick walls. As he rounded the corner, the scene that greeted him made his stomach lurch. A body lay sprawled amidst the overflowing bins, contorted at an impossible angle. It was a cogworker, recognizable by his oil-stained overalls and the intricate clockwork arm that now lay severed beside him. But it was not the mangled limbs or the vacant stare that sent a wave of nausea crashing over Elias. It was the metal. Gleaming, obsidian-like shards were embedded deep within the worker's flesh, twisting and branching like grotesque vines. Wires, thinner than human hair but undeniably metallic, snaked out from the wounds, sparking faintly in the dim light. The air around the body hummed with a low, almost imperceptible vibration. Before Elias could fully process the horror, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness at the end of the alley. It moved with a fluid, unsettling grace, its form vaguely humanoid but elongated and distorted. The only discernible feature in the gloom was the glint of more of that alien metal, catching the faint light like predatory eyes. Elias stumbled backward, a strangled cry escaping his lips. The shadow lunged, its movements a blur of unnatural speed. He swung the wrench wildly, connecting with a sickening crunch against something hard and chitinous. A high-pitched shriek, like metal grinding against bone, filled the alley. He didn't wait to see the effect. Terror lent him a burst of adrenaline. He scrambled back the way he had come, the image of the mangled body and the shadowy figure seared into his mind. The whispers were no longer just whispers. Something monstrous was loose in the Undercity, and it was leaving a trail of mechanically violated corpses in its wake. He had to get out, had to warn someone, anyone. But a chilling certainty settled upon him: no one would believe him until they saw the rust-kissed maw of Xylos open and swallow them whole. Chapter 2, Echoes in the Bone Dust Wastes. Sergeant Kyle Vance was a man forged in the crucible of Ethelbert's brutal realities. Years spent policing the sprawling, multitude city had etched lines of grim determination on his face and calloused his heart to the everyday horrors. He had seen death in 1,000 forms: industrial accidents, gangland brawls, the slow wasting away of lives choked by smog and poverty. But the reports that had landed on his desk this morning were different. They spoke of a new kind of carnage, something unnatural. The initial reports were vague, dismissed as the ramblings of drunkards or the overactive imaginations of the gutter press. But then came the photographs, stark, black and white images that even his hardened eyes struggled to comprehend. Bodies twisted into grotesque parodies of human form, limbs fused with intricate, alien machinery, faces frozen in silent screams of unimaginable agony. The metallic growths were the most disturbing aspect: sharp, black tendrils that seemed to have burrowed into the flesh, replacing bone and sinew with cold, unyielding metal. His superior, a jowly bureaucrat more concerned with maintaining order in the upper sectors, had reluctantly assigned Vance to the case, labeling it a disturbing anomaly and urging him to handle it discreetly. Vance knew what that meant: sweep it under the rug, find a convenient scapegoat, and ensure it didn't disrupt the delicate balance of power in the city. But the images haunted him. There was a malevolence in the way these victims had been violated, a cold, calculating cruelty that went beyond mere violence. His investigation led him to the bone dust wastes, the sprawling junkyard on the city's western edge where discarded machinery and the remnants of failed inventions lay in rusting heaps. It was a lawless territory, a haven for scavengers, outcasts, and those who preferred to remain unseen. The air here was thick with the smell of decay and the metallic tang of oxidized iron. He found his first concrete lead in a dilapidated shanty built from scavenged metal sheets. A terrified old woman, her eyes wide with a primal fear, spoke of shadows that moved too fast, of a metal devil that stalked the scrap piles. She had seen it only once, a fleeting glimpse in the flickering light of her makeshift fire, but the image had been burned into her memory: a tall, gaunt figure wreathed in shadow, its limbs adorned with the same black, alien metal found in the victims. As Vance ventured deeper into the labyrinthine junkyard, the silence became oppressive, broken only by the mournful creak of wind-battered metal and the skittering of unseen things in the shadows. He found more bodies here, each one a testament to the brutal efficiency of the killer. A scavenger impaled on a jagged piece of machinery, his chest cavity hollowed out and replaced with a pulsating mass of wires and gears. Another, his limbs stretched and contorted, fused to a rusting automaton in a macabre mockery of union. The sheer audacity of the violence, the almost artistic arrangement of the bodies, sent a chill down Vance's spine. This was not the work of a madman driven by simple bloodlust. There was a cold intelligence at play here, a horrifying purpose that he couldn't yet fathom. Suddenly, a metallic scraping sound echoed from behind a towering pile of discarded engine blocks. Vance drew his service revolver, the cold steel a familiar comfort in his hand. He moved cautiously, his senses on high alert. As he rounded the corner, he saw a figure hunched over something on the ground. Its back was to him, but even in the dim light, he could see the glint of black metal embedded in its flesh. Police! Freeze! Vance's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. The figure slowly turned. Its face was obscured by shadow, but Vance could see two glowing red eyes burning like embers in the darkness. A low, guttural growl emanated from its throat, a sound that was both organic and mechanical, utterly alien. Before Vance could react, the figure lunged, moving with a speed that defied its seemingly cumbersome metallic augmentations. He fired his revolver, the sharp crack echoing through the junkyard. The bullets struck the figure, but instead of tearing flesh, they sparked against the black metal, leaving trails of fire in the dim light. The creature was upon him in an instant, its metallic claws tearing through his uniform. Pain exploded in his shoulder. He stumbled back, firing again and again, but the bullets seemed to have little effect. The creature's red eyes burned into him, filled with a cold, predatory hunger. Vance knew, with a sickening certainty, that he had stumbled into something far beyond his understanding, something that the crude laws of Ethelberg were ill-equipped to handle. He was just another echo in the bone-dust wastes, soon to be silenced by the metallic terror that stalked the shadows. Chapter 3, The Cogsmith's Lament and the Screaming Gears. Illyria Vane was a ghost in her own workshop, the rhythmic clanking of her tools a poor substitute for the vibrant hum of innovation that had once filled the space. Once hailed as one of Ethelberg's most promising cogsmiths, her reputation had been shattered by a single, catastrophic failure, an experimental engine that had exploded, claiming the lives of several prominent investors. Now, she toiled in obscurity, repairing broken automatons and crafting mundane gadgets for the city's lower classes, the shame a constant weight in her chest. But even in her self-imposed exile, the unsettling rumors from the Undercity had reached her. The descriptions of the victims, the bizarre fusion of flesh and alien metal, sparked a morbid curiosity within her. As a master of mechanics, she found herself drawn to the impossible nature of these transformations. What kind of technology could achieve such a grotesque integration? When a frantic Elias Thorne burst into her workshop, his eyes wild with terror and his words tumbling out in a disjointed torrent, Illyria initially dismissed him as another denizen of the city's underbelly driven mad by fumes or drink. But his description of the metallic growths, the unnatural movements of the creature he had encountered, resonated with the fragmented reports she had heard. He showed her a crude sketch he had managed to make, a jagged shard of the black metal, its surface covered in intricate, almost organic-looking patterns. Illyria felt a chill crawl down her spine. She had never seen anything like it. It defied the known principles of metallurgy, its structure seeming both impossibly strong and disturbingly alive. Intrigued and increasingly concerned, Illyria agreed to help Elias. His fear was palpable, and the details he provided were too consistent with the other rumors to be dismissed outright. Besides, a small part of her, the part that still yearned for discovery and understanding, saw this as a chance to escape the suffocating monotony of her current existence. Their investigation led them to the abandoned Clockwork Cathedral, a colossal structure in the industrial district that had once housed the city's most intricate automatons but had been shut down years ago after a series of unexplained malfunctions and accidents. Locals whispered of strange noises emanating from within, of gears grinding in the dead of night and mournful mechanical wails. The cathedral loomed before them, a skeletal silhouette against the perpetually overcast sky. Its massive gears were frozen mid-rotation, coated in layers of rust and grime. Broken clockwork limbs lay scattered around the entrance like the discarded toys of a forgotten giant. The air inside was heavy with the smell of stale oil and decay. As they ventured deeper into the cathedral's cavernous interior, the silence was broken only by the echo of their footsteps and the occasional groan of stressed metal. The vast hall was filled with the hulking forms of defunct automatons, their intricate mechanisms frozen and lifeless. But there was an unsettling stillness, an absence of the usual sounds of settling metal that made Illyria's skin crawl. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine pierced the silence, followed by a cacophony of grinding gears and snapping metal. The dormant automatons around them began to twitch, their frozen limbs jerking back to life with a horrifying, jerky motion. Their eyes, once empty sockets, now glowed with the same malevolent red light that Elias had described. "They're alive!" Elias cried, scrambling back. Illyria stared in horrified fascination. The alien metal was spreading, she realized, not just in flesh but in the very fabric of the machinery. The automatons were being corrupted, their intricate clockwork systems twisted and perverted by this invasive, unknown influence. One of the hulking machines lurched towards them, its metallic limbs flailing wildly. Its gears shrieked in protest as its movements became increasingly erratic, its once precise mechanisms now operating with a terrifying, uncontrolled power. Illyria knew then that this was far more than just a series of murders. Something fundamental was being violated, the very principles of mechanics twisted into a horrifying new form. The cogsmith's lament was not just her own shame, but the death cry of her craft, the screaming gears a testament to a terrifying corruption that threatened to unravel the very fabric of their world. They had stumbled into something ancient and malevolent, something that was turning the intricate beauty of their technology into a weapon of unimaginable horror. Chapter 4: Descent into the Viridian Veins. Kyle Vance, despite the searing pain in his shoulder, managed to scramble back, putting distance between himself and the metallic horror that had attacked him in the junkyard. The creature moved with an unnatural speed and resilience, its body seemingly impervious to his bullets. He knew he couldn't face it in a straight fight. He needed to escape, to regroup, to understand what he was dealing with. He retreated deeper into the labyrinthine scrap piles, using the towering heaps of discarded machinery as cover. The creature's guttural growls echoed through the junkyard, its red eyes like twin beacons in the gloom. Vance could hear the scraping of metal on metal as it moved, a chilling reminder of its unnatural composition. He eventually managed to lose it amidst the maze of rusting hulks and twisted pipes. He knew he couldn't stay in the bone dust wastes. He needed help, information. His thoughts turned to the city's underbelly, to the informants and contacts he had cultivated over the years. There were whispers there, always whispers, and perhaps someone had heard something more about this thing. His search led him to the Viridian Veins, the network of abandoned subterranean tunnels that snaked beneath Ethelberg. Originally built as a transport system for raw materials, the tunnels had long since been forgotten by the city's authorities, becoming a haven for smugglers, cultists, and other denizens of the shadows. The air down here was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood. As Vance navigated the dark, twisting tunnels, the silence was broken only by the drip of water and his own ragged breathing. He felt a growing unease, a sense of being watched. The shadows seemed to writhe and shift, and the metallic scent in the air grew stronger. He found his contact, a wiry information broker known only as Silas, huddled in a dimly lit alcove. Silas was a creature of the Undercity, his eyes darting nervously, his fingers constantly fidgeting. Vance had dealt with him before, and while Silas was unreliable, he often possessed scraps of information that never reached the ears of the city guard. Vance described the creature he had encountered, the black metal, the unnatural strength and speed. Silas's eyes widened as he listened, a flicker of genuine fear replacing his usual nervous energy. "The Iron Blight," Silas whispered, his voice barely audible. "The Old Ones spoke of it. A sickness of metal and flesh. It comes from the deep places, from before the gears turned." He spoke of ancient legends, of a parasitic entity that could infest and corrupt both organic and inorganic matter, twisting them to its will. He spoke of forgotten rituals and forbidden technologies, of a time when metal was not just a tool but something else. Silas claimed that the Iron Blight had been dormant for centuries, sealed away in the deepest parts of the earth. He didn't know how it had been awakened, but he knew its signs: the grotesque fusions, the unnatural metal, the hunger for both flesh and machine. As Silas spoke, a low, rhythmic thrumming began to vibrate through the tunnel walls. It started subtly, a barely perceptible tremor, but it grew steadily stronger, resonating in Vance's bones. The metallic scent in the air intensified, becoming almost overpowering. Suddenly, the tunnel ahead was bathed in an eerie green light. It pulsed and throbbed, illuminating the damp stone walls and casting long, distorted shadows. The thrumming intensified, morphing into a low, guttural growl that echoed through the tunnels. Silas's eyes widened in terror. "It's here," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The Blight has found us." From the shadows at the end of the tunnel, a figure emerged. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs elongated and twisted, adorned with the same black, alien metal that Vance had seen before. But this one was different. Its flesh seemed to be in a more advanced state of fusion, the metal growing out of it in intricate patterns, pulsing with the same eerie green light that now filled the tunnel. Its eyes glowed with an intense, malevolent red. Vance raised his revolver, but he knew it was useless. This was not just a creature, it was something more. It was a manifestation of the ancient terror Silas had described, a nightmare made flesh and metal. The descent into the Viridian veins had led Vance not to answers, but to the heart of the encroaching darkness. Chapter 5: The Calculus of Carnage. Illyria and Elias found themselves trapped within the renomated clockwork cathedral, surrounded by a legion of corrupted automatons. The once familiar whirring and clicking of gears had become a terrifying symphony of grinding metal and mechanical shrieks. The automatons, their movements jerky and unnatural, lunged with surprising speed, their metallic limbs now weapons of grotesque design. "We need to get out of here," Elias yelled, dodging a swipe from a hulking maintenance bot whose articulated arm now ended in a cluster of razor-sharp, black metal spikes. Illyria, though terrified, found a strange sort of grim fascination in the perversion of her craft. The way the alien metal integrated with the existing clockwork, twisting and enhancing its function in horrifying ways, was both repulsive and strangely elegant in its brutal efficiency. It was a calculus of carnage, a horrifying equation where flesh and machine were being forcibly combined into instruments of death. She noticed patterns in the automatons' movements, a crude but discernible logic in their attacks. The smaller, more agile maintenance drones swarmed like metallic insects, their movements erratic but coordinated. The larger automatons, like the lumbering security constructs, moved with slower, more deliberate force, their augmented limbs capable of crushing bone and tearing through metal. "There's a maintenance tunnel behind the main altar," Illyria shouted over the din of clashing metal. "It leads to the old ventilation shafts. It's our only way out." They fought their way through the horde, Elias wielding his wrench with surprising ferocity, smashing at the corrupted gears and joints of the attacking automatons. Illyria, despite her lack of combat experience, used her knowledge of mechanics to their advantage, targeting vulnerable points in the automatons' designs, disabling limbs and disrupting their movements with well-aimed strikes. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burning oil, punctuated by the sickening crunch of metal on metal and the wet tearing of fabric as the automatons' augmented limbs made contact. One of the smaller drones managed to latch onto Elias's arm, its metallic claws digging into his flesh. He roared in pain and slammed it against a deactivated generator, crushing its delicate mechanisms. They finally reached the maintenance tunnel, a narrow, claustrophobic passage that reeked of dust and decay. As they squeezed through, they could hear the relentless pursuit of the corrupted automatons close behind, their metallic screeches echoing in the confined space. The tunnel opened into a series of ventilation shafts, a dark and labyrinthine network that snaked through the cathedral's upper levels. The air here was stale and still, a stark contrast to the chaotic violence they had just escaped. But the silence was unsettling, filled with the anticipation of the unknown dangers that might lurk in the shadows. As they crawled through the narrow shafts, Illyria's mind raced. She needed to understand what was happening, how this alien metal was able to corrupt both flesh and machine. The principles of its integration defied everything she knew about mechanics and metallurgy. It was as if some fundamental law of nature had been twisted, perverted into something monstrous. She remembered Silas's whispered words to Vance, a sickness of metal and flesh, from before the gears turned. The phrase resonated with a chilling significance. This was not just a technological threat, it was something ancient, something primal, that had somehow been unleashed upon their world. They emerged from the ventilation shafts into a deserted section of the cathedral's upper levels, a vast hall filled with intricate clockwork mechanisms that were thankfully still dormant. But the pervasive sense of dread remained, a heavy weight in the silence. They had escaped the immediate danger, but they knew the cathedral was now a hunting ground, a testament to the terrifying power of the Iron Blight. Their escape was only temporary. The calculus of carnage was still being written, and they were now unwilling participants in its horrifying equation. Chapter 6, Shadows Forged in Molten Iron. Kyle Vance, his shoulder throbbing with pain, knew he couldn't stay in the Viridian veins. The creature he had encountered was unlike anything he had ever faced, a terrifying fusion of organic and inorganic matter that seemed impervious to conventional weaponry. Silas's frantic warnings about the Iron Blight echoed in his mind, painting a picture of an ancient, unstoppable horror. He managed to slip away during the creature's initial attack, using the narrow tunnels and his knowledge of the Undercity to his advantage. He emerged into the grimy back alleys of the industrial district, the familiar stench of coal smoke and machine oil a small comfort amidst the overwhelming dread. His priority was information. He needed to find someone who knew more about this Iron Blight, someone who could offer a clue as to its origins or weaknesses. His thoughts turned to the city's fringe scholars and occultists, individuals who delved into forbidden knowledge and whispered histories. His search led him to a dilapidated workshop hidden amidst a maze of foundries and smelting plants. The air here was thick with the heat of molten iron and the clang of hammers. Inside, amidst shelves overflowing with dusty tomes and strange artifacts, he found Professor Armitage, a reclusive scholar known for his eccentric theories and his fascination with Ethelberg's forgotten past. Armitage, a frail man with wild, silver hair and piercing eyes, listened intently as Vance recounted his encounter in the Viridian veins and Silas's ominous warnings. A flicker of recognition crossed his face as Vance spoke of the black metal and the grotesque fusions. The Ferromortis, Armitage murmured, his voice barely a whisper. The Iron Death. Legends speak of it, a parasitic entity that consumes and transforms, turning life into a mockery of metal and flesh. He explained that the Ferromortis was believed to be a primordial force, predating the rise of their mechanical civilization. It was said to dwell in the deepest parts of the earth, drawn to concentrations of metal and energy. He theorized that some recent industrial activity, perhaps a deep drilling project or an experimental power source, might have inadvertently awakened it. Armitage showed Vance ancient texts, their pages brittle with age, depicting grotesque beings with metallic growths and symbols that seemed to writhe on the parchment. The descriptions chillingly matched what Vance had witnessed. The texts spoke of the Ferromortis's ability to corrupt and control both organic and inorganic matter, turning them into extensions of its will. Its hunger is insatiable, Armitage warned. It will consume everything, turning our world into a silent, metallic tomb. As they spoke, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The rhythmic thrumming that Vance had felt in the Viridian veins echoed through the workshop, growing steadily louder. The heat from the nearby foundries intensified, and the air crackled with an unnatural energy. Suddenly, the workshop door burst open, revealing a horrifying sight. Standing in the doorway was a figure that had once been human, but now was twisted and contorted into a nightmarish parody of life. Black metal tendrils snaked through its flesh, its limbs elongated and sharpened into lethal blades. Its eyes glowed with the same malevolent red light that Vance had seen before. "It has found us," Armitage whispered, his face pale with terror. The corrupted figure lunged, its metallic claws tearing through the air. Vance reacted instantly, firing his revolver. The bullets sparked harmlessly against the creature's metallic augmentations. He knew, with a sinking feeling, that conventional weapons were useless against this horror. He grabbed a heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace, the weight of it a meager comfort in his hand. He had faced down countless criminals and monsters in his time as a city guard, but this was different. This was an ancient evil, a shadow forged in molten iron and awakened from a long slumber. He knew, as he braced himself for the inevitable confrontation, that his fight was not just for his own survival, but for the very soul of Ethelberg. Chapter 7, The Obsidian Shard of Unmaking. The corrupted figure that had burst into Professor Armitage's workshop moved with a terrifying, unnatural grace. Its metallic limbs blurred as it struck, the sharp edges of the black metal whistling through the air. Vance parried the blows with the iron poker, the impact sending jolts of pain through his injured shoulder. Armitage, despite his frail appearance, scrambled to a nearby table, his eyes frantically scanning the cluttered surface. "The resonant frequency," he gasped. "The texts, they speak of a frequency that disrupts its integration." He fumbled through a pile of strange devices, his hands trembling. The corrupted figure advanced relentlessly, its red eyes fixed on Vance with a cold, predatory hunger. Vance knew he couldn't hold it off for long. The creature's strength and speed were far beyond human capabilities. Suddenly, Armitage held up a small, obsidian shard, its surface etched with intricate, glowing symbols. This might disrupt its connection, he cried, activating a small device attached to the shard. A high-pitched whine filled the air, a sound that resonated deep within Vance's bones. As the frequency intensified, the corrupted figure staggered back, its metallic limbs twitching violently. The black metal embedded in its flesh seemed to shimmer and distort. A guttural shriek, a mixture of organic pain and mechanical grinding, erupted from its throat. "The frequency, it's working!" Armitage exclaimed, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and terror. "But it won't hold it for long. We need to find the source, the heart of the blight." The creature lunged again, its movements now erratic and uncontrolled. Vance saw his opportunity. He sidestepped the clumsy attack and slammed the iron poker into the creature's chest, aiming for the area where the organic flesh was still visible beneath the encroaching metal. The creature roared in pain and stumbled backward. Black ichor, thick and metallic, oozed from the wound. It was injured, but Vance knew it was far from defeated. Just then, a section of the workshop wall exploded inward, showering them with debris. Standing in the gaping hole was another corrupted figure, larger and more heavily augmented than the first. Its body was almost entirely encased in the black metal, only fragments of its original human form still visible. Its eyes burned with an even more intense red glow. "More of them," Vance growled, his grip tightening on the iron poker. "They're drawn to the energy of the frequency," Armitage cried. "We need to get out of here." They fled through the hole in the wall, escaping into the chaotic darkness of the industrial district. The corrupted figures pursued them relentlessly, their metallic screeches echoing through the maze of foundries and workshops. As they ran, Vance noticed something glinting in the dim light, discarded pieces of the same black metal that had infected the victims. They were scattered on the ground, like fragments of a shattered nightmare. He realized that the blight was spreading, not just through direct contact, but through these metallic shards. Their desperate flight led them back towards the Clockwork Cathedral, its skeletal silhouette looming against the smoke-filled sky. Vance knew it was a dangerous gamble, but Illyria and Elias had mentioned a potential way out through the ventilation shafts. It was their only hope. As they reached the cathedral's imposing entrance, they were met by a horrifying sight. The dormant automatons outside were now fully animated, their metallic bodies twisted and augmented by the black metal. Their red eyes glowed menacingly in the gloom. The obsidian shard of unmaking, the frequency-disrupting weapon, might offer a temporary reprieve, but the heart of the iron blight still beat somewhere within the city's metallic veins, and it was calling its children home. Chapter 8, Where Clockwork Angels Fall Silent. The interior of the Clockwork Cathedral was a scene of utter chaos. Corrupted automatons, their movements jerky and violent, patrolled the vast halls. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and the grinding of metal. Illyria and Elias, having narrowly escaped the initial onslaught, were now moving through the shadows, trying to avoid detection. "The main control center," Illyria whispered, pointing towards a towering structure of gears and wires at the far end of the hall. "If we can overload the central nexus, it might disrupt their connection." Elias nodded grimly, his wrench held ready. They moved cautiously, using the deactivated automatons as cover. But the corrupted machines seemed to possess an almost preternatural awareness, their red eyes scanning the darkness with unnerving accuracy. They were forced into several brutal skirmishes, the clang of metal against metal echoing through the cathedral. Elias fought with a desperate ferocity, his grief and fear fueling his attacks. Ilaria, surprisingly agile, used her knowledge of the automaton's weak points to disable them, targeting crucial gears and power conduits. They finally reached the control center, a dizzying array of levers, dials, and sparking wires. But standing guard before it was a massive automaton, its form heavily augmented with the black metal. Its limbs ended in razor-sharp blades, and its eyes burned with an intense, malevolent red. "That's a Mark IV combat model," Ilaria whispered, her face pale. "Heavily armored. Direct attack is suicide." As they debated their next move, Vance and Armitage burst into the hall, pursued by a pair of the smaller, more agile corrupted figures. "The frequency," Armitage gasped, holding up the obsidian shard. "It weakens them, but it draws more." A desperate plan began to form in Ilaria's mind. "The resonance chamber," she exclaimed, pointing to a large, bell-shaped structure nearby. It was used to calibrate the cathedral's central clockwork. "If we can amplify the frequency within it." It was a long shot, but it was their only chance. While Vance and Elias engaged the larger automaton, Ilaria and Armitage scrambled towards the resonance chamber. The smaller corrupted figures pursued them relentlessly, their metallic claws tearing at their clothes. They reached the chamber and Ilaria began to frantically manipulate the controls, her fingers flying across the intricate array of dials and levers. Armitage held the obsidian shard aloft, the high-pitched whine intensifying. The corrupted automatons surrounding Vance and Elias began to twitch and falter, their movements becoming erratic. The larger automaton roared in frustration, its attacks becoming more clumsy. Just as Ilaria managed to activate the resonance chamber, amplifying the frequency to a deafening pitch, one of the smaller corrupted figures lunged at Armitage, its metallic claws aimed at his throat. Vance, seeing the attack, threw his iron poker with all his might. It struck the creature in its glowing red eye, piercing its metallic casing. The automaton shrieked and collapsed, its mechanical limbs spasming. The amplified frequency within the resonance chamber began to have a devastating effect on the corrupted automatons. The black metal embedded in their bodies shimmered violently, and sparks flew from their joints. Their movements became increasingly erratic, their mechanical systems overloading. One by one, they collapsed, their metallic limbs falling silent. Even the massive Mark IV automaton staggered backward, its red eyes flickering. The black metal that encased it seemed to be cracking and peeling away. But the amplified frequency was also having an unexpected side effect. The very structure of the clockwork cathedral began to groan and vibrate violently. Gears that had been silent for decades began to spin erratically, and the air filled with the screech of stressed metal. "The cathedral, it's overloading," Ilaria cried. "The resonance is affecting its core mechanisms." They had weakened the Iron Blight's hold on the automatons, but they had also awakened the ancient heart of the cathedral, and it was tearing itself apart. Chapter 9: The Galvanic Feast. The overloading of the clockwork cathedral was a catastrophic cascade of failing machinery. Gears stripped, pistons shattered, and the very walls groaned under the strain. The amplified frequency, while disruptive to the Iron Blight's influence over the automatons, was tearing the ancient structure apart. The massive Mark IV automaton, though weakened, was still a formidable threat. Its metallic shell cracked and hissed, but its red eyes still burned with malevolent intent. Vance and Elias, battered and bruised, stood ready to face it one last time. "We need to get out of here," Ilaria shouted over the deafening cacophony of collapsing metal. But escape was not so simple. The corridors were now filled with falling debris and sparking wires. The very architecture of the cathedral seemed to be turning against them. Suddenly, the ground beneath them buckled. A section of the floor collapsed, revealing a gaping chasm filled with churning gears and glowing energy conduits. The Mark IV automaton roared and lunged, attempting to knock them into the abyss. In that moment of chaos, Armitage, his eyes filled with a grim determination, did the unthinkable. He lunged forward, the obsidian shard held high, and plunged it directly into the exposed core of the Mark IV automaton. A blinding flash of energy erupted from the point of contact. The automaton shrieked, a sound of pure agony, and its metallic body convulsed violently. The black metal that encased it shattered into 1,000 pieces, and its red eyes flickered and died. The massive machine collapsed, its weight shaking the very foundations of the cathedral. But the surge of energy released by the destruction of the automaton had a devastating effect. The resonance chamber overloaded, emitting a final, ear-splitting shriek before exploding in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The amplified frequency surged through the cathedral, tearing through the remaining corrupted automatons, causing them to seize and fall silent. However, the surge also destabilized the already failing structure. Massive sections of the ceiling began to collapse, and the air filled with dust and debris. "We have to go," Vance yelled, grabbing Illyria's arm. Elias helped the weakened Armitage, and they scrambled through the collapsing halls, desperately trying to find a way out. Their escape route led them through a series of narrow maintenance tunnels, the walls vibrating violently around them. They could hear the groaning death throes of the cathedral above, a symphony of destruction that echoed their desperate flight. They finally emerged into the night air, coughing and covered in dust, just as the central spire of the Clockwork Cathedral gave a final, agonizing groan and collapsed in a spectacular shower of sparks and falling masonry. The once imposing structure was now a smoldering ruin, a testament to the destructive power of the Iron Blight and the desperate measures taken to combat it. As they stood amidst the wreckage, catching their breath, they saw movement in the shadows. Figures began to emerge from the surrounding buildings, drawn by the chaos and the explosions. But these were not the corrupted automatons. These were the denizens of the industrial district, their faces grim, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. Among them, Vance saw Silas, his face pale but his eyes wide with a strange sort of awe. He looked at the ruined cathedral and then at Vance, a silent question in his gaze. The galvanic feast was over, the corrupted machines silenced, but the source of the Iron Blight remained unknown, a lurking horror beneath the shattered remnants of their world. Chapter 10, The Final Theorem of Terror. The destruction of the Clockwork Cathedral had brought a temporary reprieve, a silence in the metallic screams that had haunted Ethelbert's underbelly. But the victory felt fragile, tainted by the sheer scale of the devastation and the lingering unease that clung to the smoke-filled air. The Iron Blight had been wounded, its mechanical puppets silenced, but its source, the ancient terror that had awakened it, remained hidden. In the aftermath, the city guard, spurred by the catastrophic collapse of a landmark structure, finally began to take notice. Sergeant Vance found himself no longer dismissed as a purveyor of outlandish tales. The evidence of the grotesque fusions, the alien metal, was undeniable amidst the ruins. But their understanding remained limited, their conventional methods useless against a foe that defied the very laws of their world. Professor Armitage, though weakened by his ordeal, became an invaluable resource, his knowledge of ancient texts and forgotten lore providing the only framework for understanding the nature of the Iron Blight. He theorized that the blight was not merely a mechanical contagion but something akin to a parasitic consciousness, capable of inhabiting and corrupting both organic and inorganic matter, driven by a hunger for assimilation and growth. Ilaria, haunted by the perversion of her craft, threw herself into studying the fragments of the black metal recovered from the destroyed automatons. Its properties were baffling, its structure seemingly impossible. It seemed to possess a form of internal energy, a subtle vibration that resonated with a disturbing, alien frequency. Their investigation led them deeper into Ethelberg's forgotten history, to tales of subterranean excavations that had delved too deep, of ancient seals broken, and of a darkness stirred from a long slumber. They discovered fragmented maps and cryptic diagrams hinting at a vast, subterranean network beneath the city, a place where the Iron Blight might have originated. Driven by a desperate need to understand and ultimately destroy the source of this horror, Vance, Ilaria, and Armitage, accompanied by a wary but increasingly cooperative Elias, descended into the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the ruined cathedral. The air down here was heavy with a palpable sense of dread, the silence broken only by the drip of unseen water and the faint, rhythmic thrumming that had become a harbinger of terror. As they ventured deeper, they began to encounter remnants of the Blight's influence, patches of the black metal growing on the tunnel walls, strange, pulsating organic metallic growths, and the lingering echoes of mechanical whispers. The sense of being watched intensified, the shadows seeming to writhe with unseen life. They finally reached a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in the oppressive darkness. In the center of the cavern, bathed in an eerie green light that pulsed with a sickening rhythm, was a colossal structure of interwoven metal and organic tissue. It was a grotesque fusion of machinery and flesh, a pulsating heart of black metal that seemed to throb with a malevolent intelligence. Tendrils of the alien metal snaked outwards, disappearing into the darkness, presumably connecting to the network that stretched beneath the city. This, they realized, was the source. The heart of the Iron Blight. As they stared in horrified awe, the pulsating structure began to emit a low, guttural growl that resonated deep within their chests. The green light intensified, and from the shadows, corrupted figures began to emerge, not just automatons, but humans twisted and fused with the black metal, their eyes burning with the familiar red glow. The final confrontation had begun. Vance drew his revolver, knowing its limitations but determined to fight to the end. Ilaria wielded a makeshift weapon crafted from salvaged clockwork parts, her knowledge of mechanics now her only defense. Armitage clutched the remnants of the obsidian shard, hoping its disruptive frequency could still offer some protection. Elias, his face grim, held his trusty wrench, ready to face the nightmares that had haunted his steps. The corrupted figures lunged, a tide of flesh and metal driven by the Blight's malevolent will. The cavern echoed with the roar of gunfire, the clang of metal, and the guttural shrieks of the transformed. It was a desperate battle, a fight for survival against a horror that threatened to consume their entire world. They fought with courage born of desperation, knowing that if they failed here, the Iron Blight would spread, turning Ethelberg and everything they knew into a silent, metallic tomb. The final theorem of terror was being written in blood and sparking metal, and their lives were the ink. The end.